Hello to all, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Tasia Johnson, Telecompetitor's Operation Manager. We would like to thank you for joining today's webinar, Key 2025 ISP Network Trends Insight, sponsored by Preseem. Before we get started, I want to apologize for something that we didn't have control over. This webinar was originally scheduled for last week. But Zoom had technical issues and thus we were unable to proceed with the webinar. But thank you again for those who carved out time to join today. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded for replay purposes. As you listen to the webinar, questions may arise. Feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A icon. Again, we would like to thank Preseem, today's sponsor, for producing or contributing to today's webinar. Preseem by our Artello Networks is a proactive software platform built for ISPs. It boosts growth, enhances customer support, and optimizes network performance to meet service providers' unique challenges. Today's goals for today. As you listen to the webinar, you'll hear that our goals will be to explore new metrics for fiber networks and operators. They're gonna compare subscriber trends between fiber and fixed wireless technology, share key industry benchmarks from Preseem inaugural ISP Operations Survey. Our SMEs for today, we have Jeremy Austin. Jeremy is a senior product manager at Preseem and leads analytic product direction with a focus on fixed wireless. He's based in Alaska. I said that right. He brings 20 plus years in the telecom industry as it relates to network engineering. In addition to Jeremy, we have Matt Denick. Matt is the product marketing director at Preseem, and he brings 25 years of global experience in tech and marketing. He helps ISP boost performance, reduce support calls, and improve customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is so important today. So just take a note to that. With that being said, I'm now going to hand the webinar over to Matt, and Matt, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Tasia. Appreciate it. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Really excited to dive into some of the interesting trends that we see from our over 400 deployments around the world across fixed wireless and fiber networks. As Tasia mentioned, we're also going to dive in today into some ISP results that we've seen from a survey we ran across our customer base as well, just to get some insights into common metrics that all the folks on the call today are likely thinking about. Customer satisfaction, how do you score that? How do you trend it? Your churn, is it within acceptable benchmarking guidelines? How long are you spending on network support related tickets? And how long is it taking your support folks on average to resolve those support tickets? So really excited to dive into these trends today. We're going to start with the ISP Operational Survey, but before we do, we're going to keep things fairly interactive as well. In addition to the Q&A that I encourage you to populate as you have questions, we're going to ask a couple of poll questions today to get a sense for where you're investing and where you're heading into the rest of 2025. And the first is, which area is your team most prioritizing in 2025? So is it reducing churn? Your team's very focused on that. Are you focused on increasing customer satisfaction? Perhaps you're really focused on improving that subscriber support efficiency with your teams. Or maybe you're looking at even just scaling your fiber fixed wireless networks and those deployments as well. Or maybe it's something completely different. We'll give you a couple seconds here just to answer the poll, and we'll get a sense for how we can better frame the discussion that we're going to have today between Jeremy and I. All right. Okay, just looking at the results of the poll here. So it looks like the majority of you are looking at scaling your fiber or fixed wireless deployments. That's great news. As many of you as well responded that you're looking to reduce churn. That's great news. I think on the scaling and on the scaling your fixed wireless and fiber deployments, Jeremy's got some really great data that I mentioned from our over 400 deployments around the world that should help you whether it's in vendor selection or just generally trying to improve the efficiency of your network. So thanks for responding to that poll. The very first stat that we're going to get into here is talking a little around the benchmarks that we uncovered as a result of our first ever ISP operator survey. And so what you're seeing on the screen here are just some benchmarks that we've correlated across all the responses. And we wanted to get a sense for and answers to a lot of the questions that we hear when we talk to customers, when we go to events like Fiber Connect or Wispapalooza. We hear a lot of folks talking about exactly this. How do I measure success? What does my customer satisfaction look like across the network? And am I doing a good job of that? What is my annual churn? Is my annual churn within benchmarks? And what is a good benchmark? How much time should I be spending or my team be spending on resolving network-related support tickets? And how long should it be taking my team to resolve those support calls as they come in? So the very first one, Net Promoter Score, this is a measure of customer satisfaction. Some folks will use Google reviews. Other folks will use Net Promoter Score that looks at the willingness to recommend your brand or service to a friend or colleague. And so typically what we see across the industry with Net Promoter Score in telecom, telecom regularly ranks in the lowest in terms of industries for Net Promoter Score with a score of 31. 61, a Net Promoter Score benchmark of 61 indicates a couple of things. I think regional ISPs are doing an incredible job of delighting customers. I think it speaks to the strong brand. I think it speaks to the sense of community that y'all invest in creating, for your subscribers. So a Net Promoter Score benchmark in this industry, regional internet service providers and broadband service providers of 61 is incredible. Next is related to churn. So we wanted to get a sense for how folks are experiencing churn, and it's one of the metrics that businesses use to evaluate the health of the business. And this metric alone, churn, can be used to hint at it could be a greater indicator that things are running smoothly or that there might be a larger or broader problem with the customer experience. So a good benchmark to shoot for that we found from our survey is around 3%. We're going to unpack these stats as well in greater detail because there's some very interesting statistics and correlations between churn and even the speed at which you're able to respond to support tickets. So the next is really around network-related support tickets. Something that we wanted to see is what is a good benchmark to aim for in terms of all the volume of calls that come into your support teams, the percentage of those that are actually network-related, and how quickly you can resolve those. And the last is really talking about support call resolution. So how quickly is your support team able to, once you have a customer on the phone with a support call, resolve that issue quickly and get the customer back in their way. So the first metric we're going to dive into is a little around churn. And something that we wanted to see with churn specifically is, does churn affect smaller ISPs more acutely than maybe larger internet service providers? And something that we found is higher churn rates seem to affect ISPs with less than 5,000 subscribers more prominently than ISPs that have more than 5,000 subscribers. And I think this probably has a few things to do with the competitive markets that you compete in. And I also believe that it has, the larger you are, you have greater access to resources to address these as well. Something that's really interesting, I think, from churn that came out from the survey is that over half of the respondents reported that their annual churn rate is greater than 4%, when with some even responding churn being in the double digits. So something to think about and benchmark your own success when you look at the net folks that are actually deactivating and divide that by your customer base is sort of how you get that churn metric. So 3% is a very good benchmark to look at there. Next is around customer support. So we wanted to get a sense for how long is it taking folks on average across all of our customer deployments and how they are seeing their teams perform to respond to support call resolution. So that very first level one, first call support ticket, how long is it taking? And we see a few things. First of all, less than an hour support call resolution is typically the norm. That's the majority of folks responded that it's taking about an hour or less to resolve their support tickets, which is excellent. The longer a customer's on hold, the more frustrated they're going to get. We also see that there's a clear trend line that shows efficiencies are gained as an ISP size increases. So similar to churn, likely due to access to more resources as you get larger. Typically, we see that customer support tickets and the duration involved in addressing those starts to decrease as well. The next, we will look at network operations specifically. And what we wanted to get a sense for here was, how proactively are you able to manage the network and what proportion of support tickets coming in are network related? Something that we see a very good benchmark to shoot for here is having less than a quarter, less than 25% of your support tickets being network related. We wanted to see if there was a linkage between network net promoter score and network of operations efficiency as well. And overall, I think ISPs with high net promoter scores, thinking about that benchmark of over 61, those ISPs are more likely to report that their customer support tickets, the portion that are network related is about a quarter. So we see some interesting correlations there. And then looking at, I think we have a poll. We wanted to just get a sense from everyone as well on how long is it taking your teams on average to address support tickets as well. So give Essence a second here to launch that poll. So we'd love to see your responses here. So what percentage of support tickets that your team is taking in, such as high speed that are network related? This will be slow speeds, high latency, maybe intermittent connectivity, loss, buffering, all of those things that would be sort of network related. So we'll give everyone a couple of seconds to answer here, and then we'll look at some of the results as well. All right, let's have a look here. So everyone that responded to the poll here responded with less than 10%. So that's incredible. What percentage of your support tickets are network related? Less than 10. So that speaks to, I think, the efficiencies of your teams, how quickly and how efficiently the actual network itself operates, and how quickly you're able to resolve those tickets as well. So that's great. That's a really great metric that you're able to move, by investing in not only reducing churn, but also investing in making the network operate more effectively, as well as your team. So that's a great result. Great to hear that from everyone on the line here. All right, and the last is similar to what we had talked about earlier, where a lot of folks are looking to add new access technologies. One thing that we wanted to get a sense for is how many folks are looking to add new access technologies to the network. And something that we saw is that ISPs are generally planning on adding more vendors to the network, and those that are planning on adding more vendors typically see that they have less than 25% of their network operations time is resulting in those performance tickets. But one thing that I thought was really interesting is that we saw 36% are planning or considering adding new access technology vendors, whether fixed or fiber, within the next 12 months. So it's definitely something that I think, on the wireless side and on the fiber side, a lot of folks are investing in adding new vendors. So that's really, really great to see. Okay, so this is going to be the crux of really what we're going to be talking about today with the results of our annual ISP Network Report. We've included some really great benchmarks here that we just walked through, but also from our own customer data, what does it look like across fixed wireless networks and as well fiber networks, and looking at some of those differences. And to do that, I'm going to bring in Jeremy Austin, who is going to lead you through all of the great results of this year's report. Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Just want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We will do a Q&A at the end. I'm going to move pretty quickly through a bunch of data, so you might want to write your questions down, because I'm going to be kind of, hopefully not an info dump, but I'm going to hopefully give you some real insights about the data that we're seeing. I want to talk for a minute about how we actually collect that data. The reports that we'll be sharing with you is, here today and later is collected from, as Matt said, our deployments worldwide, and we have far more in this report than we can really get through today, but you'll get a taste of what we have in it. So we collect from our deployments, we collect billions of metrics, probably trillions of metrics a day, actually, at this point. And we're measuring the end-to-end payload that the customer is passing across your network. If you run an ISP network, you're passing bits for your customer. And we're collecting, the loss, latency, and throughput stats for every single customer at a very high granularity. So when we analyze and give you a report, we're very often looking at what's happening on the network when the network is most loaded. If you look at this chart, you'll see that there's a daily cycle everyone's familiar with in the evening, where everybody gets on the internet, or if they come home from work and maybe they're finished with dinner and turn on some streaming. That's when the network is at its most loaded, and the network performance then is what's most critical. That's the part of the day that the user is going to be, if they're having a bad experience, it's most likely going to be at that time of day. So we make a big difference about peak throughput and peak stats versus off peak. So we calculate when the day is busiest. So first, I'm going to talk about traffic itself, since we do collect quite a bit of traffic data. Then I'll talk about some wireless hardware and then fiber lastly. So in 2023 to 2024, which is the period that we're talking for this 2025 report, this ends in fall of 24. That becomes our 25 report. We have seen that the active subscriber, so like when a subscriber is actually using the internet, that average is it's about 7 megabits right now. That's up from 6.5 megabits the year before. So it's beginning to, the rate of climb is beginning to drop a little bit. The average user is consuming just under 13 gigabytes a day. The median user, I apologize. And that's just under 400 gigabytes a month is our median user. So you're thinking about, okay, you sell usage-based plans, you're wanting to understand, what we're seeing globally. That's what we're seeing today. Latency, which is one of the key performance indicators that we measure at Preseem, has improved 9%. Some of that is due to a growth in fiber, because fiber inherently has lower latency than fixed wireless. And a lot of it is also due to operational improvements in fixed wireless. Fixed wireless is doing really well as well. So I love seeing improvement across the board. That makes me very happy. And I'll show you some charts to show that as well. I'll break that down a bit more. So in terms of the gigabytes downloaded per day by technology, we see that fiber users do consume a bit more than wireless per day. The median is a little bit higher there, you can see on that peak. And I'll explain why that's the case as we go on through a few more charts. Year over year, looking at this per day, we said this is about an 8% change on the average and about a 12% in the median. We don't yet have the statistics for this for fiber, because we only started collecting fiber. We've had fiber data in our pool for a long time, but we really only started analyzing this relatively recently. So next year we will have a baseline change of fiber over year over year. You'll see that this corresponds with the chart that we just saw, that fiber users are consuming more data than fixed wireless in general. That's it's different from what they're experiencing at peak. So we'll continue on, because the question is, why is fiber so much higher than fixed wireless? And we'll get to that answer as well. See if you can figure it out as we get there. So another way that we like to look at how the experience that people are having at peak hour is we look at the global peak busy hour average. So what this means is, for each company in each time zone, we are creating a circle on the graph here, and the circle is representing the size of the ISP, the size of the circle. And on the horizontal axis, we're showing what's the peak busy hour download in megabits per subscriber. This is less than what we saw previously for the active subscriber, because even at peak busy hour, not all subscribers are active. And initially, we analyzed this by technology, fiber versus wireless, but we found no meaningful difference here, which is really interesting. And so I'm not breaking it down here by technology. This is just all users, fixed wireless and fiber, that we see. And you can see that essentially there's a bell curve where most operators are seeing a peak busy hour load per subscriber of just over 4 megabits per second, right around 4 megabits per second. And then in the upstream, which is the vertical axis, the upload direction, we're seeing that that's still pretty low. It's still about an 8-to-1 ratio. Averaged across all the subscribers. Now there are outliers. You know, the circle on the far right of the graph is a fiber provider, and the circles on the lower left-hand side of the graph are fixed wireless in non-English-speaking countries, where the peak usage per subscriber is much lower because the plans that they're selling are much smaller. Let's take a look at latency here as well. So we find that to look at the entire picture of what's happening, a histogram is pretty helpful. This shows from 0 to 200 milliseconds on the horizontal axis, the overall distribution pattern that we're seeing. And the green line here is what we saw in 2023, and this blue line here is 2024. So we saw a leftward shift, which is really great. We like to see that every year. We want to see latency improving. As I said before, it's about a 9% improvement. And then we can also see that in the continuous distribution function, the dotted line here. Similarly, we have fiber, which is this yellow peak here. So you notice that fiber also exhibits this bell curve, but it is shifted to the left about 20-25 milliseconds from fixed wireless. And that is because even on fiber, most packets are going to be delivered via wireless when they finally are exit the network in the customer's home. And fixed wireless just has one additional wireless hop, which kind of adds together to combine to see that initial latency that you see there. Let's talk about fixed wireless for a moment. We'll talk about some vendor updates here. We do analyze every year all of the hardware that we can see, and from there we can kind of extrapolate to some market trends, as well as see whether performance is improving and how performance is doing in the field. So this is one of my favorite charts. This shows loaded versus idle latency. So for example, the 5th percentile of latency samples will be when the network is pretty idle. So for example, excluding in-home Wi-Fi generally. And then the 80th percentile we find is very helpful for understanding the user's overall experience. So we can see that there are several clusters of equipment performance. I have them colored by manufacturer here. And so all the blues are Cambium, for example. So the EPMP series, for example, the older 3000 series has a little bit higher excuse me, a little bit higher loaded latency than the 4000 series here, whereas the EPMP 3000 is a little lower idle latency than the 4000. And you see some other things, like if you look at LTE is going to have a higher initial latency just due to the nature of the technology. And then clustered down here in the bottom, we have a lot of the kind of fiber-like wireless technologies. For example, wave access points from Ubiquiti, LTU Rocket as well. And we see that these exhibit very low latency, sometimes under a millisecond when idle, and when busy are exhibiting pretty much just the latency that you would expect to see due to the in-home Wi-Fi, and not really much additional latency. A little bit additional latency, but not too much there. We also see some Tirana in the green. Tirana is in terms of latency, it's a little bit like LTE and a little bit like other forms of fixed wireless, in that it's going to have a higher baseline latency, that's minimum latency. That's why we're up here on the graph. But when it's under load, we're not seeing a significant shift to the right. For example, it is not worse than the majority of legacy technologies. For example, the AC-based gear or the Cambium PMP line, they all exhibit pretty similar latency under load, which you can expect as a result of the whole network coming into play, not just the wireless equipment itself. Quick table here. Lower numbers don't necessarily mean that an operator is leaving the marketplace, just that there's a shift in balance. So for example, Ubiquiti saw significant access point growth, just under 5% here, which is quite large, but not as much CPE growth. And I believe that's due to concentration of lower density access points, like the wave APs that I just talked about on the previous slide, where the average number of subscribers per access point is going to be lower. So that's going to cause an increase in the number of access points relative to the total number of subscribers. Tirana has had significant CPE growth here, just under 5% as well. That's nearly 50% year-over-year growth in access points. So what we saw initially during the first, let's call it year, 18 months of Toronto deployments, as they really started to hit the marketplace, we saw deployments being built out. So the number of access points relative to the number of subscribers grew. Now we're seeing more maturity, where now you can actually get out and install or upgrade older customers, install new customers. So we're seeing that number of CPEs begin to rise as we're seeing, where Toronto is hitting their stride on the growth curve. So we expect to see some airspan added to Mimosa, but right now those numbers are low and kind of stable here. In the global market, airspan is doing very well. In our sample set, it's not doing as well as I would expect. And then we had some other vendors that dropped below our 1% reporting threshold. So if you're not seeing a vendor on here, it's probably because they've dropped below that in our global set. Again, this is representative Preseem customers, not the global marketplace overall. This is not investment advice. Let's take a look at performance again. We measure performance across the hardware when we can get it every year, and we like to report on that. What you will tend to see year over year is capacity declines because usage grows, and as usage grows, you really can't keep adding more customers. In fact, once a network is saturated, you really have to take customers away in order for other customers to be able to actually consume more data. So that generally involves building out your network more and adding access points so that you can move subscribers to additional access points. So we're still seeing the Cambium PMP 450 being more mature in the marketplace. We have a slightly higher average of subscribers per AP, but in terms of the 95th percentile, we have seen a drop. I remember seeing the days where we saw PMP 450 with 195 subscribers on it. Well, those days have gone as people really want to consume more data. So Toronto is currently the leader of the pack there, with the 187 being the maximum that we've seen. Again, this P95 will be catching up here as Toronto gets more saturated in the marketplace. And then the older series are holding pretty steady, again, with just a slight decline based on the fact that you need to actually deliver more bits per subscriber. Similarly, on the access point download per peak, not just connected subscribers, but how much we are seeing, as expected, we're seeing, some usual clustering around technologies that are a similar generation. So, for example, the Mimosa A5C and the Ubiquiti Rocket Prism 5AC. Those are very similar generations based on AC Wi-Fi. So Toronto users are enjoying much faster speed plans. There's more significant carrier aggregation, and so the average for Toronto is definitely creeping up there as we're seeing more saturation in the marketplace, and the P95 is looking really good here. There are operators selling gigabit plans on Toronto. But again, what we're interested here is the throughput of the entire access point. And as we showed previously, most people are not using a gigabit at peak busy hour. Let's pivot a little bit and let's talk about fiber. First thing I'll talk about is fiber latency here, and our subscriber latency across all technologies. And we're showing here both the 50th percentile and the 80th percentile, and then peak times versus all times. And what this chart really shows is that there's not a significant difference in peak versus all times on fiber. Like we're seeing a very similar slope in terms of the increase, which means that most of the increase in latency is coming from that demand and the additional latency in the home as the home network gets busy, particularly if you're dealing with service plans. You see there's a lot on fiber, right, where a service plan may exceed the capabilities of the in-home network. The fiber itself is not the bottleneck, and we'll see some additional charts on that in a minute, where I'll be talking about what we see in terms of the subscriber plan speed, what effect that has. When we look again back at the latency here, this idle and busy latency, this shows a very similar picture to the one I showed you before, where in this case this is just 1 year, but notice that the idle fiber latency and the the busy fiber latency, you're still going to have this long tail of high latency samples due to what's going on in the network. And you can clearly see that there's about 1 wireless hop of latency added. When we talk about wireless, we are dealing with the idle latency looking like 1 hop and the P95 looking like 2 hops, where you're adding again about 25 milliseconds due to that busy wireless hop. So that's very common across all kinds of networks, that most of the latency that's induced under busy hour is due to the in-home Wi-Fi. And then in terms of throughput, we do have fiber versus wireless here. Excuse me. And we see that there is really not a huge difference in download in peak times versus all times. So all times are here in the dark blue, and the peak times are in the medium blue. It's not radically different by technology. If you look at this this left side of the graph, it's very much a case where operators really are delivering the plans that they say that they were. So for example, if the network were significantly constrained at peak busy hour, then you will see that there would be a greater delta between the two. Now, the opposite is true with upload. On the right-hand side of the graph, these are upload charts here. There is a bigger delta between the peak versus all times. And we believe that that is largely due to the fact that plans are symmetric. So for example, many fiber plans have the same upload speed as download. And even though the upload speed is rarely saturated, as you can see here, that's you still can exceed the peak capacity due to the fact that there's just a lot more upload available. That's largely due to the nature of wireless. There are 60 gigahertz technologies, milliwave technologies that allow for symmetric plans, but most fixed wireless and cellular technologies have a split, a time-based split, maybe 75% download versus 25% upload. And in those environments, the upload is seldom congested, but it is also constrained. So while it doesn't affect the average usage or the peak usage, the usage at peak busy hour, it does affect the peak speeds that you can offer in the upload. So for example, if I want to upload a big video file, I do some video production, and I want to upload a 100 gigabyte file to YouTube, it's going to be significantly faster on one of those milliwave technologies where I can have even 100 megabits up versus versus a more legacy fixed wireless plan. This is my last chart for you, and this tells one of my favorite stories. So this is the solid lines are showing fiber, and the dotted lines are showing wireless. And the lower set of lines is the 50th percentile. So think of that as the median user, and the upper line is the 80th percentile. So think of that as your busier, not the very busiest users, but users who maybe they're like me, they work from home or they do some sort of media consumption or generation. They consume more data than the median by a fair amount. There are a lot of legacy fixed wireless plans. If we look at below 100 megabits, below 50 megabits, in fact, we can see that there are samples here. There are wireless providers worldwide that are still selling plans below that. And that's a combination of factors. One, it might be spectrum availability. It might be consumer demand. If you're in a part of the world where a 50 megabit plan is very expensive, then you're going to have a lot of people still on smaller plans. Because for most uses, for the peak busy hour uses, those plans are still adequate. But you do see that we're looking at the total amount of bytes downloaded through the month. We do see that there is still a constraint. As you see, this is falling off down to nothing as you get down to a very slow plan. So under about 50 megabits, you will see that there is some compression occurring where demand is not being met by the supply. And once you're no longer constrained by the plan speed, however, if we look at kind of above this knee here, kind of in the 50 to 75 megabit range, depending on which percentile we're looking at, we then see that growth is very flat. In fact, you have to, to go from, about 400 gigabytes per month is what we saw in the median, to go to that to 500 gigabytes per month, I'm sorry, we have to quintuple the plan speed. We have to go to 500 megabit plan in order to even see a 20% rise there. So as you sell bigger plan speeds on any technology, once you get over about 75, definitely by the time you're over about 100 megabits a second, the usage really flattens out. It does not grow very much. So there are several things that I want you to take away from this. One, wireless is very competitive. All the previous examples we saw of fiber users using more data, it's because they're on faster plans. There are no slow fiber plans. That's not literally true. There are very few markets that have very slow fiber plans, and we make sure that we are only sampling where we have enough data points to really make sure that this is reliable. And in fact, on fixed wireless, we're tending to see greater usage, except for this dip at 200 megabits. We are seeing slightly greater usage across the board than fiber. And some of that might have to do with the fact that wireless tends to be in places where there are fewer alternatives. There might be fewer alternatives for television. So people who have fiber might also have more options for TV, whether that's over the air, for example. We don't have enough data to precisely say why for a given user that there may be demographic differences. So one of the advances that we'll hopefully make in the next version of this report is we'll actually look at demographics and compare fiber and fixed wireless within the same company. Anecdotally, when we talk to companies that are doing both fiber and fixed wireless, they find very little difference in behavior between those two types of users. So our opinion right now is that it's largely due to just overall demographics. That is, that wireless providers tend to be in more rural areas, and that fiber usage is higher because you're selling higher plan speeds, not because the user behavior is radically different. So I'll just quickly recap. We wanted to aim for under 3% churn, as Matt told us. We are seeing improved latency, 9%, which is really great, slightly better than it was the year before in terms of how much improvement there was. We're seeing lots of access point growth, primarily in MIMO technologies like Tirana, where you can service many subscribers from one base station and you can deliver fast plans. There's definitely demand for that, and including gigabit plans on fixed wireless. And milliwave is also still seeing significant growth. Again, those gigabit plans on short range are being driven by, are driving the milliwave adoption. And then lastly, when it comes to fiber, like you're definitely delivering a lower baseline latency, but in terms of the end user experience, it's very similar. What matters more here is what speed plan the user is on. That's going to be more predictive of the user experience, and then how carefully you are managing. As an ISP, you're managing the in-home Wi-Fi. So all of this stuff can be found in our fixed wireless report, which we're going to make sure you have access to. There's a whole bunch more stuff in here than we could really talk about today. So with that, I want to hand it back to Tasya, and let's take it away.
Oh my gosh, Jeremy, Matt, thank you, gentlemen, so much. That was very insightful. And the fact that you kind of touched on the NPS score is very vital because our industry follows it. So wanting to get into some of the questions for those that have not had the opportunity to submit questions, please feel free to do so. We still have a little bit of time. Hopefully you found this event to be very insightful and informative. So one of the questions that I had from the audience, Matt or Jeremy, whomever prefers to respond, is you mentioned your service, Preseem services for the Canadians. How and what are the benefits of using Preseem within the United States?
Do you want me to take that one, Matt, as the American?
Sure. Yeah, I guess. I mean, like broadly, I'll let you chime in as well. I don't feel like there's going to be a lot of separation between Canadian, the Canadian and US market, but yeah, I would love to hear, given the fact that you're located in Alaska.
Yes, in fact, I'll be
how you
going
feel.
over to see Matt in the Toronto region here in just a couple weeks. Right now, North America isn't broadly distinguished when it comes to end user behavior, particularly if you're looking like metro area versus regional. It's going to feel very similar. We don't measure things like the cost of a plan, so we can't report on that in terms of overall costs. We see a much bigger difference when we're looking at other continents. For example, parts of the world where bandwidth is much more expensive, they
Mhm.
can still be doing a fantastic job delivering the plan, but those plans are going to be smaller than they are over here. Demand will be, I think demand is going to be very similar. So those users are going to be constrained in what they can do. But that's not a technological problem. That's an economics problem. So between US and Canada, we do not see significant differences. They're really very similar in terms of where we are on the continent.
Okay, sounds great.
Great question, though.
Awesome. So Matt, did you want to chime in on that, or we can go to?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what Jeremy said. The
Okay.
vendors are the same, right? I mean, the access technology are the same. You're going to have, in terms of its delivery of services and speed, very, very similar. Between the two, the focus on quality of experience, huge. I worked at an operator for 10 years. That was something that, we were uniquely focused on, was everything that we talked about from a benchmarking perspective, reducing support tickets, reducing the time a customer spends on hold, reducing churn. Like those are kind of the holy grail of operational metrics that hopefully we give you a bit more insight into what to look for and how to benchmark those across your own networks today.
There's definitely a growth curve in the ISP world, and I don't just mean that you are continually having to improve your network, which you are. This is a business where it's not like water or electricity, where your household use is going to stay kind of the same from year to year.
I can't
unless you
tell. My
the
water
rates
bill is
might go
so
up,
high.
but the rates might go up, but the internet is the exact opposite. The rates are continually being pushed down, and the consumption has been continually driven up. We are seeing that flatten off, particularly in developed markets. Like I think in Europe, mobile usage is almost flat year over year. So we're beginning to get to the limits of how much people can consume and how high resolution that needs to be. Particularly as we get to more generative AI, I think you're going to see more things that are generated locally. But there are parts of the world that are not yet at that, they haven't reached that saturation point. And so they're still on this growth curve. So what we can say that's really interesting as an ISP is if you can figure out where you are in that growth curve, that helps you optimize for things like Matt was talking about. Do you need to optimize the customer experience for support? Do you need to optimize the customer experience for network? That's something that we can help you do at Preseem. Sorry for the plug there, but it's like this is what we see. We see this story happening. We see that growth curve globally, and it's really fun to be able to work with operators that are like some of them. I was in the ISP space for many years before joining Preseem, and as an engineer and an entrepreneur, and it's really neat to see networks that are where I was 15 years ago, right? Because the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And we're seeing the internet, of course, drives that experience that eventually those parts of the world are absolutely going to get to where we are today in the US and Canada.
Okay. But thank you for providing us that insight. Another question that has come in is, how does AI contribute to Preseem's growth? Because it's now laying precedence, right? Within the industry, we have the BEAD funding happening, but AI, post BEAD or in between BEAD, AI has come in. And it may be a question that, we table, but you may be able to answer.
We could talk about it.
How does AI contribute to Preseem's growth?
Well, I can say that AI at present isn't driving more usage of the internet as we experience it as consumers. It is driving network usage very heavily in the data center. So for example, let's say you fire off a request, or you hit Siri, or you chat GPT, or even just if you were hitting a feature, if we have a feature that uses AI, for example, that's going to use a lot of power in the data center. That isn't going to be a heavier use of your internet bandwidth. In fact, I think it's going to eventually contribute to a reduction. So for example, right now, the amount of energy that it takes to say dub a video in a different language, that's high enough that that's happening in the data center. That's not happening on your phone. But you could anticipate a world in which that happens on your phone. And so you don't, it's actually less bandwidth being transferred over the network. So I see the AI can produce a lot of interesting effects in the internet business, but I don't think it has an impact immediately on how much bandwidth people are using.
Okay. So it does not affect the bandwidth, but still give
I think it will, Tasia. I just don't think we're there yet. I think we have a few more generations of technology to go through. But this is the history of of technologies. We see things that
Technology.
used to be very expensive, they get faster and faster and cheaper, and
Yeah.
eventually they contribute to definitely shifts, either a rise in consumption, like
Mhm.
when we couldn't stream video, we weren't doing it, but now that we can, we're doing it.
Yes. Well, I don't want to date us. As everyone know from your bios, we've been in the industry for a while, so totally can resonate with that. As you know, technology advances, the price is going to go down. What is that? That's economics, econ 101 or 102. But so I digress. But okay, so I have another question here. How can we tell if network related support issues are truly due to congestion or something on the subscriber side, like Wi-Fi?
Yeah,
Matt, you want to take this one?
I'm happy to take that. I think, yeah, it's an interesting question. Something that comes up a lot, I think, as well, is that we see in multi-access technology networks, right, where you operate fixed wireless, you operate fiber, multi-vendor networks as well, where you might even have to deliver those fiber and fixed wireless services multiple vendors. A lot of what is locked up in with those vendor tools is the data, right? And I think in order to spot issues due to congestion, or maybe you need to have access to all of the data. Like, you need to understand and get visibility into the metrics and understand how that's trending over time, right? It's kind of the old acute versus chronic, and what does that look like? So real-time metrics, while interesting, aren't really going to tell you the full problem. They're
Right.
not going to tell you if conditions are worsening, if congestion is getting worse. They're not going to tell you if there's issues, and how effectively pervasive those are as well. So you need to be able to, I think, in addition, is be able to isolate that visibility into the different segments of the network as well, obviously, right? If you want to be able to tell if it's in the access network or in the subscriber's home or in the backhaul, you need to be able to measure those sort of independently, right? So in order to understand where to fix. So looking at, I think, the best ways to address that in terms of like the network related support calls, if they're due to congestion, is to understand and track, from multiple different segments of the network where that data is coming in, to understand where you need to prioritize the fixes. And it's really it's really critical to, I think, have that visibility, that unified approach to how you address those issues.
100%, Matt. You're singing my tune, and that's actually one of the that trying to solve these problems is why I came to work at Preseem. I had met the team, and it's like, you're doing things I've wanted people to do for years. That ISPs desperately need this information, and I really love building solutions that do exactly that you're Matt, what you're describing, where it like, particularly in this day of AI, for example, there's so much information all the time. Knowing what information to look at and
Mhm.
reducing that down to the amount that you need to consume right now, that's money in the bank for an ISP to be able to say, well, hey, if we have, you know, if you go try to measure something after the problem occurs, it's too late, right? You've got to measure
Yeah.
it ahead of time and know about how to put that to good use, and we do that really well at Preseem. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
I am so glad to hear, Jeremy, that you found home and proceed, and being able to contribute to your expertise and allocate it to proceed. We do have time for several more questions, but we're going to address one more.
Okay.
So the question is, how do I know if our churn rates is high because
Mhm.
our network performance, or if it's more of a marketing or competitive issue?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think, even looking at the data that we were able to collect from churn just in general, from the responses to the survey that we ran, it's something that's on the top of mind for every customer out there, right? It's like, how do I not only understand what my churn rate is, but how do I take steps to proactively address it, right? And I think
Prevent it.
there's, it's difficult to predict. Yeah, it's probably impossible to predict, really, whether or not a subscriber is going to churn. There's a number of different factors that go into it. Maybe they're moving. It could be competitive, but I think, while there's no perfect way to predict churn, I think identifying things like churn propensity or churn risk are really critical, right? What's the customer's experience? How many times are they calling into support? How long are they spending on support? Understanding if there's fiber overbuilds happening on your fixed wireless network, or understanding if other competitors like Starlink are coming in, and how do you fight back against them? But I think being able to proactively reach out to customers in known competitive areas, especially, is really critical. So in situations where you maybe do have Starlink moving into to the area itself, how do you actually use that insight to proactively offer more competitive services to your customers? Maybe it's better competitive speeds, or making a focus for the organization to really focus on the customer experience. But I think doing that and doing it well and understanding where your churn risk exists across the network is kind of the first step. And it's really the first step to stopping churn in its tracks in that case.
Jeremy, any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Matt's got it.
So before we wrap it up, gentlemen, I feel like Matt kind of wrapped it up. But if there were 1 to 3 takeaways, what would they be?
1 to 2 or 3 takeaway. Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, for me, selfishly, I think what I was able to take away from this session as well from all the participants is where your areas of focus are for this year, and also an understanding, of looking at the access technology vendors that you're looking to build out across fiber. So building out more scale and capacity there. That's always something that I'm interested in learning. And for, I think, everyone on the call, obviously, Jeremy kind of wrapped it up, but think about those benchmarks, right? How are you measuring customer success today? How are you measuring your subscriber satisfaction? If you don't do it today, look at things like Net Promoter Score. It's really easy to do. It's a simple survey to your customers on their willingness to recommend. And doing that and putting the focus on it helps to, because what gets measured gets done, helps you put the focus on the areas you can improve in the network. And that's going to have really reciprocating benefits across the entire organization. You're going to increase your efficiency, you're going to reduce churn, you're going to do all of these great things just simply by focusing on those elements and delivering a really great customer experience.
Yeah, and I'd also add that from a customer experience perspective, you don't need to be intimidated by a multi-access network, for example, where you have multiple, maybe you're growing as an ISP and you purchase the cable guy down the road, and you're beginning to do more fiber, and maybe you've been doing fiber for 40 years or 30 years, and you want to get into some fixed wireless because fiber is not always cost effective. The story is really good there, right? This is something you can be successful at for sure. And the important thing is to have tools that give you the same visibility into that customer experience, no matter what the access technology is. And the same story is true with multi-vendor. Let's say that you've been relying on a vendor for years that is no longer allowed to be sold in the US, for example. And you can really have the same visibility into the user experience no matter what your vendors are. And so that's a story that we see operators winning with, and we really like to support. That's what we do at Preseem.
Glad to hear. Thank you, gentlemen. Before we wrap up for today, just wanted to thank you guys, Matt and Jeremy and Preseem, for sponsoring today's webinar. Fiber Connect is coming up. So guys, if you're at Fiber Connect, feel free to reach out and connect with them at the booth 684. For those Telecompetitor audience, we do have a 10% discount as being partners. So you will see that here. Click on that link and you get 10% off. And we would like to thank, again, Preseem, Matt, and Jeremy for joining us today and serving and showing their expertise. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Telecompetitor
Tasha.
audience. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Bye
everyone.
now.